In certain lighting conditions, your camera can get confused and give you the wrong exposure. This is where the exposure compensation comes in handy. You can use it to increase or decrease your exposure by one full stop to achieve a properly exposed photo. Here's an example of it in action. When you've got a brightly lit scene outside and the inside has got a different exposure level, you can start to use your exposure compensation. So to do this is we take a shot through here. We see the outside's brightly lit, but we can't really make out the features of the model's face. So we start to just bring up our exposure compensation there. I've moved up half a stop here, and we start to see the features of the face starting to come out. And so we move through again, another full stop. Start to see the back blowing out, but the model's face coming brightly lit. So I'll just push it a little bit more. And you see there that we're really starting to blow it out through our exposure compensation. So we'll just move it back a little bit. There we go. All the features are coming through the model. So you can use this to bring up the level of the subject through our exposure compensation. So remember, when your subject is overexposed or underexposed, you can simply use exposure compensation for a great shot. This is a common scene with photographers and a very common problem. You have a scene in front of you that is very hard to expose for. The camera is torn between exposing for the bright sunny day outside and exposing for the darker interior. There is an explanation. We are born with this super camera in our head. It's better than any Sony, Canon or Nikon. Our eyes see about 24 stops of light, but unfortunately our cameras see only about 14 stops of light. So you have a problem. How can we increase the range of our camera to see the same scene as we do and get the right exposure? This brings us on to one of the tricks of professionals, exposure bracketing. You dial in how many stops you want to bracket and the camera under or overexposes to those levels. In this example, I've taken a few different photos to show you the range you can obtain. I chose one of the shots that looked the best and adjusted the lighting slightly in Photoshop. If I had really wanted to, I could have used a process called HDR and I could have joined two exposures together. Luckily my exposure was good enough to use. You can use exposure bracketing at any time and it's insurance for those times you don't get a second chance to get the right exposure. Getting the right exposure is up to you and what you want to be doing with your exposures creatively. Here I'm going to be shooting a couple of different exposures using a wide aperture and a small aperture. When you use a wide aperture and you have it completely open, your depth of field is almost razor thin. Just behind her starts to blur out. So we'll take a shot here and we start to blur out the background. But as we start to change it through, and I'll move it up to around about f4, you see the background start to come into focus. So I'll move it up a little bit more here. So we got f8, and you can start to see the trees and the scene behind the model starting to come into focus. So I'll just move through a little bit higher again. So there we are, f11, and you can start to see the trees really coming into focus here, and we'll move all the way down to f16. Now it's f16 and 1/20th of a second, so we'll probably get a bit of movement in this shot. So if you're seeing that shot, everything's in focus at f16, but at f1.4, the model's in focus, but the background's completely out of focus.